Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well, because I suspect that's when this video is going to get uploaded. But shall we read further into Tommy Robinson's manifesto? Well, where do we begin? Well, where we last left off, I guess, page 79. So, there are in recent history cases of famous academics who have written huge books. But where among hundreds of pages on history, these academics casually discussed the oligarchy, and the author would then find that despite the author's significant academic credentials, the publisher could be induced to suppress the book, ensuring the public could not buy it. One such author was Professor Carroll Quigley, who taught both Bill Clinton and the husband of Nancy Pelosi. After Professor Quigley's book on the history of the 20th century was suppressed, he went on to explicitly write a book on the Anglo-American establishment. Just because would-be oligarchs, such as Bill Clinton, are instructed on how the oligarchy works, it doesn't mean such students revolted in disgust. They just learn where to focus their efforts to get further power and riches. By suppressing information, facts, ideas, phrases, the oligarchy can keep most people as phrase slaves, with conditioned behavior such that as soon as the phrase slaves hear a word or phrase, they are whipped into line. Contemporary examples are racist, far-right, Islamophobic, hate speech, transphobic, blackface, cultural appropriation, conspiracy theory, vax denier, climate denier, etc., etc. The people of that age were phrase slaves. The abjectness of their servitude is incomprehensible to us. There was a magic in words greater than the conjurer's art. So befuddled and chaotic were their minds that the utterance of a single word could negative the generalizations of a lifetime of serious research and thought. The mere utterance of it could damn any scheme, no matter how sanely conceived. Vast populations grew frenzied over such phrases. The coinage of such phrases was considered strokes of genius, unlike the strokes of losing my fucking voice. Anyway, in Animal Farm, Orwell was to refer to the equivalent of phrase slavery as gramophone minds. Orwell was conveying the idea that the oligarchy can enslave the public to set phrases. Then once this phrase slavery is in place, the mind of the enslaved individuals automatically target in preset grooves. In Animal Farm, such phrase slavery is 2 legs good, nearly had a stroke, 4 legs bad. When the farm animals tell themselves that they are free when they are slaves. Jack London didn't just predict a second failed revolution in Russia. In 1908, he was also predicting that America would go to war with Germany, which came to pass in less than a decade. Finally, there were indications that we saw the oligarchy not only as a stratified social and political structure, but also that the oligarchy in America was not the same as the oligarchy in, say, Germany. Throughout the 20th century, the international connections between members of the oligarchy in different countries would become stronger, like failed MP Nick Clegg, the pleb, moving to the USA to work for Facebook. Of all those who became members of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders Program, an institution which has been running for over 30 years and of which the founder of Wikipedia was one of the members, but about which Wikipedia contains no details. Even before the time of Jack London and Robert Michaels, or whatever his bloody name is, I still can't think of that, people were looking around for a phrase by which to describe the oligarchy. The English writer William Cobbett, from 1763 to 1835 he lived, God rest his soul, used the phrase "the thing" to put a name to the oligarchy. The paragraph is from stroke number 1, from a 1980 book, The American Establishment. To Cobbett, the thing was that network of individuals and institutions that coined the money, invented and preached the morals, created, and I can't stop fucking smiling now, created and ran the best schools, passed out the honours, and upheld the system. It included the aristocracy and the gentry, the gentlemen's clubs and the gentlemen's universities, the high churchmen and the top editors of what Cobbett said the bloody old, or called the bloody old times. And as the thing upheld the state upheld the thing. Credit for the first use of the term, the establishment, as a label for the thing belongs to the British historian A.J.P. Taylor. Taylor used it in an article about Cobbett in the New Statesman of April 19th, 1953. The irony is that Oxford University professor A.J.P. Taylor and socialist propaganda sheet The New Statesman, or The Guardian journalist Owen Jones, I wouldn't call him a journalist, but hey ho, let's just go with it for the time being. Anyway, act as if they are not in service to the oligarchy. If the powerful give someone a platform by publishing and marketing their book, by employing them at a university, in the media, or on a public body, etc., then that is only because it suits the oligarchy. Go against the oligarchy, and as we shall see, they will do all they can to destroy you, including provoking your assassination if necessary. I mean, just take a look at Trump. Cobbett had no university education, and he was in favour of currency being backed by gold. He opposed political corruption and advocated for parliamentary reform. He was jailed for 2 years for publishing an objection to the flogging of a group of men. Later, he became a member of Parliament. Or maybe I was right first time. In the index of Owen Jones' book, The Establishment, a book boasting praise from members of the oligarchy, including a member of the House of Lords, you will find no reference to William Cobbett, Jack London, Robert Michaels, James Burnham, Carroll Quigley, not even to A.J.P. Taylor, who is credited with coming up with the phrase. It looks like Jones wants the public to think he came up with these ideas all by himself. I mean, wouldn't that be a bloody surprise? Huge ego on that fucker. Anyway, but then again, consult the notes section of this book, and it is made up of almost entirely to links to websites, suggesting Jones doesn't bother much with books. Yet Jones is a graduate of Oxford University. He has worked for The Independent and The Guardian, where it's likely that more than 50% of the journalists went to the University of Oxford or Cambridge. With their leftist hypocrisy and identity politics, the oligarchy distracts the public from the power and control exercised by the oligarchy. Owen Jones is so little threat to the establishment that they gave him a place at the top university than jobs at prominent international news organisations, and the most mainstream publishers sell and market his books, leaving him time to be invited as a guest on TV shows. When invited to discuss a Muslim who shot 100 people in a gay bar in Florida in 2016, which killed 50, brave radical Jones ran off the TV stage after apparently trying to say the attack had nothing to do with Islam. The headline from newspapers in the background of the discussion when Jones went off stated, "The killer, he swore allegiance to ISIS, then shot 50 dead." That was from the Times. And ISIL wages war on gays in the West, from the Telegraph. The other tame, pro-gay journalists in the TV discussion were anti-Trump and were arguing for banning guns in America. It's hard even for gay people to see what Jones's problem was. Perhaps Jones just had a moment of clarity, realising what an Islamic future entails. Jones need not have bothered having a tantrum. The oligarchy would protect Islam by ensuring that the Islamic mass murder of gays in Florida would soon be dropped down Orwell's memory hole, as the oligarchy does with all terrorist attacks by Muslims. Compared how the death in these attacks are forgotten with how the death of Stephen Lawrence is kept alive. The Wikipedia entry on this terrorist attack doesn't even identify it as an Islamic terrorist attack, calling it Pulse nightclub shooting. We doubt if most readers could even name 20 Islamic terrorist attacks from the past 20 years. Yet MI5 foiled 31 quote-unquote late-stage terror attack plots against the UK in the past 4 years, and 6 during the scamdemic. Oh, sorry, I meant pandemic. Or again, maybe I was right first time. The Telegraph put that out in 10th of September 2021. MI5 used to keep a public list of the notable terrorist attacks in Britain, but the oligarchy deleted that list some 10 years ago. to deceive the public about the scale of the problem. A problem the oligarchy knowingly imported to Britain. See Muhammad's Quran. While that list was still available, it showed 23 notable attacks or foiled attacks in Britain in less than 11 years. We can now find no official record of all Islamic terrorist attacks in Britain. The unofficial Wikipedia list is obviously incomplete. If Jones had stepped off the oligarchy's approved narrative and he had denounced this attack as Islamic terrorism against homosexuals, Jones would have almost certainly have had his career destroyed. See chapter 3.9 below. The oligarchy have to maintain the pretense that their mascot groups and identity politics lead to nothing but diversity and enrichment. The final chapter of Jones's book, The Establishment, is embarrassing. He proposes a democratic revolution, but his limited suggestions are not remotely revolutionary. He wants more state control and some workers on the management of companies, a return to things advocated even by conservatives decades ago. That's basically all he has to offer at the end of a 350-page book. He has no knowledge of the centuries of debate about the thing, the oligarchy, the establishment, so he proposes as revolutionary ideas that are nothing of the kind. But the leftist cult just lap up his trite nonsense. For example, in 1973, the Conservative Political Centre published Workers on the Board, a study in employee participation. Jones is so revolutionary that Britain's conservative organisations were putting forward the same ideas to him a decade before Jones was even born. Or perhaps we should just see the publication about workers on the board of directors as one of the signs of how socialist Britain conservatives have been throughout the last century. Even the USA, that supposed bastion of uncontrolled capitalism, had government committees at the start of 1961 considering the benefits of worker participation in business management. Another document published by the US government in 1932 talks positively about the implementation of workers' councils in Germany. Jones is a product of the oligarchy, and he can't envisage anything the oligarchy have not previously envisaged. His role in the oligarchy is that of the far-left gay mascot. The mascot of the oligarchy... Stroke number 2. The mascot of the oligarchy isn't going to come up with anything that challenges his own privileged position. Jones is a member of the fewer than 1% that go to Oxbridge. He works for the subsidiary of a company with £1 billion in assets. A company which has extensively used tax shelters and the corporate laws of capitalism. Jones's books are published by a company that is valued at around £5 billion. Jones isn't going to bite the hand that feeds him. In 1911, Nichols was already citing really revolutionary proposals for democracy, proposals that had been put forward in 1870, more than a century before this mascot of the oligarchy was born. The next time you see Jones having a tantrum, just remember that he's fulfilling the role associated, or allocated to him rather, by the oligarchy. The oligarchy reward him for spouting leftism to him because a bigger state gives the oligarchy more opportunities for power and enrichment. Don't expect someone who has been in the 1% of his entire adult life to have any real critique of the elite and the exploitation of power. 3.2 Political Parties. Although Michaels could see that his iron law of oligarchy applied not just to political parties... Am I lower than this, or is it just me? That might be a bit better. There we go. Michael focuses analysis on the German Social Democratic Party, or the SPD. At the time, the largest socialist party in the world, and also a Marxist party, which appeared to be at the time the most committed to the extension of democracy. Michaels himself was a member of the Socialist Party, even though his membership meant that he was then not permitted to teach at universities in Germany. To Michaels, there was no point in showing that a conservative party was opposed to democracy. What mattered was to show that even those who vigorously claimed to be pursuing democracy were in fact self-serving. The socialists fought for adult suffrage, free speech, and for popular participation in the operation of governmental and economic institutions at every level. If such parties were themselves undemocratic in their internal structure, Presumably, the effort to completely stroke number 3, to completely democratize society must fail. It's no wonder the left hates Michaels for what he exposed about their hypocrisy, even though in his loyalty to the Marxists he tried to say the oligarchical self-interest wasn't hypocritical. It's also little wonder that the left have done their best in the past 50 years to ensure that Michaels and his works were ignored. Even today, the left will pretend they are a critical part of democracy, or that they are critical to democracy and want more democracy, all the while ensuring that the public don't get to learn what Michaels exposed about the left more than 100 years ago. What are the fundamental causes that lead anything other than a small organisation to fall under the control of an oligarchy? Firstly, once there are leaders and followers, the leaders have control of resources, and that allows them to control the followers. Bullet points coming up. Leaders have the means to communicate to followers from on high or individually. Leaders have information the followers don't have. Leaders have time to work for the interests of the oligarchy because they are funded by the followers. Leaders have authority because they have a higher status. The leaders have persuasive and argumentative skills. Leaders often have charisma. Yeah, Keir the traitor Starmer having charisma. Pull the other one, Macy. Anyway, and leaders have organisation skills. Michels points out that the training programs for the officials of the Socialist Party or of trade unions create an elite from the working class, increasing the gap between the self-serving leaders and the masses who pay for their self-serving leaders. It's not just that the leaders have skills and organisational assets that the followers don't have. There is also the problem of what Michaels refers to as the incompetent of the masses, i.e. that the followers have less educational sophistication than the leaders, and that the masses are looking to be led. Whilst you might think this snobbishness on the part of Michels, you should bear in mind that Lenin shared this view of the masses as well, as do all politically correct modern leaders. Even when the leaders were working class, when they become full-time leaders employed by a trade union, charity, university, party, or an elected councillor, or member of Parliament, or again, maybe I was right first time, they have in fact come to form part of the ruling oligarchy. And thus, many of the policies of mass organisations reflect not the will or interests of the masses, but the will and interests of the leaders. Though the leaders are serving their own interests rather than those of the leadership or the organisation, they may still be jockeying for the position within the oligarchy where there appears to be infighting. Still, if some challenger should risk taking control from the prevailing oligarchy, the rest of the oligarchy are more likely to unite to destroy the challenger. We can consider Trump's position as an elected politician in this light. Despite their protestations about believing in democracy, civil rights and rule of law, etc., when faced with any threat, the oligarchy will jettison any principles and deploy the most anti-democratic and repressive means to maintain their power over the followers. Before the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in October 1917, Michels' analysis correctly predicted that even after a socialist revolution, nothing would change. A new oligarchy would simply arise and rule the masses in its own interests. Lenin, a strong advocate of a completely free and democratic society, quickly resulted in one-party rule. The Bolsheviks seized power and suppressed all others, even those groups that had supported the revolution and fought with the Bolsheviks against their military opponents. In 1920, just 3 years after taking power, the Bolshevik Party began to purge its own ranks. It denied its own members the right to form groups, to advocate policies within the party. It should be abundantly clear why the left don't want the public to understand what Michels saw and what he predicted. The founder of Islam has less claim to the title of prophet than does Michels or Jack London. Even as late as 1957, more than 40 years after Michels wrote Political Parties, when one of the top Yugoslav communist politicians advocated for more democratic accountability, he was imprisoned for 7 years. By the 1950s, there had only been one attempt by a communist intellectual, Nikolai Bukharin, to engage with what Michaels had exposed. In acknowledging the importance of political parties in one of his books in the 1920s, Bukharin described it as very interesting. Bukharin was at that time second only to Lenin as a theoretic. This word is very hard to pronounce. I'm not having a stroke. Theoretician, I think, or theoreticician. Theoreticician. And I've lost where I am. I'm being destroyed by words. God almighty, where was I? A theoretician of communism. Sorry. And both Lenin and Bukharin believed in the masses being led by a small group of professional revolutionists who would lead the incompetent masses. Michaels was a realist who recognized that these professional revolutionaries would inevitably serve their own interests. Thus, one of the lessons to take from this is that the virtue signalers are either delusional or they are dishonest, flaunting their principles that they will abandon when it comes to stroke number 4, satisfying their own self-interests. The principles are flaunted to distract others from the virtue signalers' total lack of principle. We should expect to find even the holiest of organizations to be riven with self-interest and hypocrisy at the upper levels. Michaels even anticipated the protests of Marxists. In all the socialist parties, there is a continual increase in the number of functions drawn from the electoral assemblies, and transferred to the executive committees in this way. In this way, there is constructed a powerful and complicated edifice. Certain socialists, above all the orthodox Marxists of Germany, seek to convince us that socialism knows nothing of leaders, that the party has employees merely being a democratic party, and the existence of leaders being incompatible with democracy. Michaels goes on to state quite emphatically that this is a false assertion. The Marxists offer no evidence to contradict Michaels. So it's no surprise that instead the left just choose to pretend his analysis does not exist. And it's no wonder that people familiar with Michaels' analysis find the prospects of democracy to be depressing. The most avowed egalitarian organizations are always run by a self-serving elite. As far back as the 1950s, even those who admired Michaels' analysis and thought it correct still found it depressing because they hoped democracy to succeed. In the language of 2024, Michaels works as a black pill. This phrase is an extension of the theme in the movie The Matrix, where the character of Neo, well, we should all know this one, is asked to remain deluded, take a blue pill, or to wake up, take a red pill. The black pill means that taking the red pill is of no use because even if you wake up, there's no way to change things. This is basically the concept of what's the term that my mother has? I'm trying to think of it now. She lacks not ambition. It's sad that I've forgotten this because I should know better than that. She's apathetic. That's it. She's apathetic. It's basically a term of apathy. We will show later that there is a way beyond oligarchy. Since traditionally political power is delegated to a small group of leaders, this oligarchy is then able to use that power to ensure they cannot be removed. With this elite fixed status, they then serve their own self-interests, only pretending to follow the principles that they espouse. Michaels himself felt that he had proven democracy and socialism to be structurally impossible. It goes without saying, if democratic socialists who espouse wider democracy, more civil rights, equality, etc., etc., are going to be corrupted and exploit their power, then so will Christian conservatives, Republicans, communists, liberal Democrats, etc., etc. Or again, I think I was right first time. The label does not matter. The power relationship will lead to oligarchy, corruption, deceit, hypocrisy, and self-enrichment by the oligarchy. When he wrote Political Parties, he still strongly favoured the struggle for more democracy as a means of reducing oligarchic tendencies. Once having demonstrated that democracy is impossible, that democratic leaders were in effect hypocrites, Michaels found it difficult to retain any sustained belief in democratic ideologies and movements. I don't know if you saw it, but as I was reading the book, I didn't even realise my nan actually walked onto the camera, so I'm going to feel fucking awful I mean, she doesn't have any internet, generally speaking, so she shouldn't find out. But I know what my sister and my mother are like, so... Well, it's more my sister than my mother, but, you know. But anyway, we'll get back to it, so we can actually get this sorted out. So I'm trying to remember where it was. When he wrote political... I've read that bit. By insisting on looking past the myths, past the virtue signalling, Michaels blackpilled himself because he exposed the lie of representative democracy. He has been removed from history. Remember, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. 3.3. Black Pill. Fascism, National Socialism. So where did the black-pilled socialist Michaels turn? He turned to Mussolini's fascism. It was Mussolini in 1928 who personally offered Michaels the professorship at Perugia University. That might seem like a shocking switch for a far-left socialist to make. But as we discussed briefly earlier, Mussolini was a socialist, as was Hitler. In asserting this, we are pushing against some 80 years of propaganda and deceit, so we must show you more of the evidence of the socialist credentials of Mussolini and Hitler. We will also show you that before World War II, Mussolini was much admired in the West by leftists among others. We have to push repeatedly against the well-worn grooves of the gramophone mind, so in Chapter 5.4 there will be a further discussion of the relationship between fascism and socialism in British... Stroke number 5, man alive. Socialism in British politics. Mussolini was the editor of a political periodical entitled Class War, the megaphone of the extremist wing of the Italian Socialist Party, and after attending the Socialist Conference in 1912, he became one of the leaders of the party and the editor of the party's national newspaper, a move of which Lenin approved. Lenin told the communist Nicola Bombassi, the man present when Mussolini was killed, in Italy there was but a socialist able enough to lead the people through a revolutionary path, Benito Mussolini. Michaels had supported the Marxist Social Democratic Party in Germany, the SPD, at the cost of his employment. But when the SPD switched to supporting German nationalism in World War I, Michaels abandoned his now nationalist Marxist party in Germany. By contrast with Michaels, Mussolini took his departure from the Italian Socialist Party because Mussolini supported his country in World War I, but the Italian Socialist Party did not. Italian Marxists turned to fascism precisely because they viewed the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia as not a real communist revolution. Emphasis on the word not. A communist revolution, according to the prophecies of the religious cult of communism, could only occur in an industrialized economy. Since neither Russia nor Italy were industrialized economies, according to the catechism of Marxism, something else was required in countries such as Italy. The failure of Bolshevism in Russia to bring about a real communist revolution was what spurred Mussolini, the Marxist, to devise a different form of socialism. Nevertheless, even once Mussolini had his fascist party and things had gone disastrously wrong with the economy of the Soviet Union, under Mussolini's urging as the Prime Minister in 1924, Italy was the first country in the world to sign a treaty recognizing the Soviet Union. Later that year, Britain also recognized the Soviet Union. A decade after World War I, Michaels was to come to admire Mussolini. Words are hard. Michaels' attitude to Il Duce sounds very much like the comments in defense of Fidel Castro offered by some of his supporters. That might seem strange to us, as after World War II the oligarchy only present Mussolini as a strutting buffoon. But in the early decades of the 20th century, Mussolini was regarded across the West as an important and alluring figure. While academics debated the finer points of Mussolini's corporatist state, mainstream America's interest in Mussolini far outstripped that of any other international figure in the 1920s. From 1925 to 28, there were more than 100 articles written on Mussolini in American publications and only 15 on Stalin. We can predict that after World War II, the oligarchy's have used Michael's association with Mussolini as a way to dismiss the arguments of political parties as far-right. But it's obvious from the book that Michael's allegiance was with the far left, since he not only suffered professionally because of his allegiance to a Marxist party, but in political parties, the only movements where he sees any hope are in the trade unionism and anarchism. And just in case you think Mussolini was laughable in describing himself as Il Duce, the leader, this was the honorific title given to Mussolini by an Italian Marxist, and he was not being ironic. Mussolini was designated the leader of Italian Marxists a decade before he formed the Fascist Party. Lenin, and I quote, Lenin once deemed Mussolini as one of the 5 greatest Marxist theoreticians of the 20th century. End quote. The major Italian biography of Mussolini is 6,000 pages long. The collected works of Mussolini amount to 36 volumes. He is portrayed as a buffoon, so you will accept the fascist state's caricature of the far right, and Mussolini's, and you won't look for the similarities with the society in which we live. Socialist Mussolini thugs wore black, because the thugs were drawn from a violent anarchists who wore black. And the modern-day thugs of the fascist state, falsely describing themselves as Antifa, anti-fascists, also wear black. So when the black bloc of thugs of Antifa remind you of Mussolini or Mosley's black shirts, you are right to see the similarity. The violent thugs of Antifa are the violent thugs of fascism. The fascist state has just rebranded their boot boys as so-called Antifa. If you look at the specific policies of the fascist party in the 1920s, you will see how these policies were decades in advance of what would come to be normal in liberal democracies. An 8-hour workday for all workers, a minimum wage, worker representation in industrial management, equal confidence in labour unions as in industrial executives and public servants, reorganisation of the transportation sector, revision of the draft law on invalidity insurance, reduction of the retirement age from 65 to 55, a strong progressive tax on capital, confiscation of the property of religious institutions, revision of military contracts to allow the government to seize 85% of profits. The minimum wage was introduced in Britain in 1999 under, I'm not calling him that, Tony the War Criminal Blair, when Mussolini had advocated this near the start of the century, and for those who were wondering, it had Sir in it. I am never going to refer to that wanker as Sir, let me tell you. Just like I said in my last video, I'm not going to refer to Keir the traitor Starmer or Sadiq terrorist sympathising Khan as Sir. But I digress. From 1940 to 2010, the retirement age in Britain was 60 years for women, but this was increased under Blair's New Labour to 65, then 67, and is almost certainly going to go even higher. Mussolini advocated a retirement age of 55. The maximum working week in Britain is 48 hours. Again, introduced by Blair in 1998, not the 40 hours proposed by Mussolini. A century later, and Britain hasn't reached the levels of social justice that far-right Mussolini was aiming for in the 1920s, and Mussolini did use the phrase social justice. Britain's far left has only recently been advocating for as revolutionary the idea of workers on the board of companies, a century after Mussolini advocated this. Britain's fascist state has yet to implement as much social justice as Mussolini proposed. The leftists rely on the public not even looking to Wikipedia to see how far left were the policies of the supposedly far-right Mussolini. When you see how much people have been gaslit by the oligarchy, it's almost laughable. In case you think that Mussolini's corporatist state simply means that Mussolini sold out to corporations, that's not the entire meaning of corporate stroke number 6. That's not the entire meaning of corporatism in Mussolini's fascism. A book on politics and economics in Britain before 1945, aimed at young adults, so no specialist political tract, has an entire chapter entitled The Growth of Corporatism and Welfare Provision 1914 to 1945, which shows that the political project of corporatism and its connection to the welfare state existed in Britain before Mussolini was even promoting it. There are good arguments that Britain's corporate state was the inspiration for Mussolini's corporate state. The historian mentioned above says, British government involves in relations between employers and workers grew rapidly from the 1890s and became more important from the First World War. What historians and political thinkers call corporatism developed. This comes about when the government works with powerful economic groups, most importantly, industrialists and trade unions, but also sometimes financiers and traders. I need a moment. This also describes Britain throughout the 20th century until the period of the Thatcher Revolution. Since destroying Thatcherism, the oligarchy has found more cunning ways to run their corporatist state. Now the oligarchy works through quangos such as the NHS and Ofcom, the Office of Communications, Ofgem, Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, Ofwat, more like Off-Twats, Water Service Regulation Authority, Food Standards Agency, Charity Commission, Electoral Commission, Confederation of British Industry, Financial Conduct Authority, etc., and systems such as Private Finance Initiative. Britain's fascist state controls society and the economy from the remotest levels, to pretend that, to the public that the state is less involved in our lives than it actually is. There's a pretense that we elect local government who then set the local taxes. The reality is that the fascist state tells local government what it must do, how it must spend the majority of the money it raises. To the extent that local elections in the UK have any significance, it is to question of potentially electing which people become the temporary salaried managers, who then take most of their orders from the fascist state. Local government is just another of the corporate bodies of the fascist state with a veneer of democracy. Whilst the narrative pretends local politicians are independent of the fascist state, they are merely functionaries with little input and are not going to risk their salaries, named allowances, whatsoever. Perhaps a century ago there was some real point to voting in local elections in Britain, but Britain's modern fascist state is now far bigger and far more centralised and far more authoritarian. The Stalinists, the Trotskyists, and the liberal democrats all want to portray fascism as far right. So it's important to understand that even the word fascism is leftist, with origins in the concept of fasci. Usually this is said to be the bundle of sticks bound together around an axe, the logo of the fascist party. However, the word was in use on the left in Italy decades before Mussolini created his party, because the idea of being bound together is the root phrase for trade union in Italian. Thus, fasci silisani de lavoratori, or lavoratory, lavatory, basically. Shut up! were the Sicilian Workers' Leagues between 1889 and 1894. And in 1914, Mussolini created the Leagues of Revolutionary Action, Fasci d'Azione Rivoluzionaria. These various leftist leagues amalgamated, bound themselves together into bigger leagues. Fasci Rivoluzionario d'Azione Internazionalista and Fasci Autonomi d'Azione Rivoluzionaria merged to form Mussolini's Italian Fighting Leagues. I didn't know I could speak fucking Italian. Anyway, Fasci Italian di Combattimento. And it was these Italian Fighting Leagues in 1919 which became the Fascist Party in 1921. Just as workers were being bound together for increased strength in trade unions, Fasci, so Mussolini, and the philosophers around him, set out to amalgamate, unionize to unite, the different parts of the state, workers, businesses, etc., for increased strength. The deceitful leftists will say, but Mussolini banned trade unions, which is a half-truth. The Bolsheviks in the Soviet Union also destroyed trade unions becoming part of the government and were subjugated by the Communist Party. In both cases, the leftists in control of Italy and the leftists in control of Russia believed that the interests of the workers were represented by their totalitarian state. To the extent that trade unions existed, they were no longer independent of the government. As opponents of socialism, we oppose what Mussolini did and we oppose what Stalin did. But as we will show below, many famous British socialists admired Mussolini, Stalin and Hitler. In Britain, trade unions are mostly controlled by Trotskyists. Now that you have some clearer understanding of Mussolini and fascism, let us return to the British origins of Mussolini's fascism. Of course, these origins have been concealed by the British elite for the past century. Ludwig von Mises, one of the greatest economics and philosophers of the 20th century in 1949, described Mussolini's fascism as a rehash of Britain's guild socialism. Words are hard. Their fascist gospel was merely a replica of British guild socialism. The Stato Corporativo, this word is fucking hard. The corporate state of Mussolini was nothing but a rebaptized edition of guild socialism. Mises was so perceptive in pointing out the areas of socialism that by 1920 he was proving that socialist economics was bound to fail, as it did in the Bolshevik Russia, shortly after Mises' prediction. In a work originally published in 1922, before Mussolini's fascism and Hitler's National Socialism became the dominant frame of reference for the politics of the last 100 years, Mises said of British guild socialism, and I quote, "Guild socialism greatly deceives itself if it believes that it could create a socialist order of society which would not endanger the freedom of the individual and would avoid all those evils of centralized socialism." Even in a guild socialist society, the whole control of production belongs to the state. The state alone sets the aim of production and determines what must be done in order to achieve this aim. Directly or indirectly through its taxation policy, it determines the conditions of labour, moves capital and labour from one branch of industry to another, makes adjustments and acts as an intermediary. These tasks are the only important ones, and they constitute the essence of economic control. The whole system is an attempt to translate the political constitution of the English state into the sphere of production. Its model is the relation in which local governments stand to central government. End quote. Thus, from Austria, and unable to speak English, Mises was able to understand in 1922 what the guild socialism of Britain meant. So the well-schooled international Marxist Mussolini certainly would have had an understanding of it too. Moreover, we can see from this analysis how it's the relationship between the British state and the local government and the various boards which give rise to Mussolini's idea of a corporate state. Similarly, the French philosopher-historian Élie Halevi, in a 1936 lecture, The Era of Tyranny, saw the connection between British guild socialism and the rise of fascists and National Socialism. Halevi was most famous for his 6-volume history of 19th century British politics. Since Mises was the last knight of the liberalism of the 19th century, still riding into battle with socialists in the 1950s, when he was in his 70s, maybe you think Mises, or Misos, or whatever, was biased about the origins of fascism and British socialism. So here's an excerpt from one of the most prestigious accounts of British socialism, written in 1919, 2 years before Mussolini formed his fascist party, describing guild socialism from the perspective of the Marxist author Max Beer. And I quote, "Labour leaders proposed the transfer of the means of production from a private capitalist to the state. Nationalisation of monopolies was their policy. They looked forward to an impartial state controlling and organising industry, securing for the worker an adequate share in the wealth he produces, laying charges on industry for the benefit of the weak and incapable, with a state department in place for a limited company. From this point of view, the trade unions represented the germs of the future organisation of industry. Collectivism would form an industrial bureaucracy. Syndicalism and industrial democracy," S.G. Hobson, the author of National Guilds, deals exclusively with labour and economic conditions in Britain. Its author and editor have drunk deep from the source of Marxism. Its critical stroke number 7. Its critical apparatus is grounded on syndicalist form of Marxism. Its positive contribution contains several British elements. It envisages the nation rather than a class, and it presents an outline of the practical application of syndicalist, trade unionist ideas to British economic life. The concept of Mussolini's fascism should be obvious in the above passage. Unions, syndicates, and corporate bodies, an industrial bureaucracy, controlling and managing the state to disperse welfare benefits to the working class, with people united by nation rather than divided by class. There is no mention of parliamentary democracy, no mention of individual freedom. It's all about collectivism, which is the enemy of the individualism. British guild socialism wasn't just some crackpot theory by one man. The theory of guild socialism was developed and popularised by G.D.H. Cole, who formed the National Guilds League in 1915 and published several books on guild socialism, including Self-Government in Industry, 1917, and Guild Socialism Restated, 1920. G.D.H. Cole was one of the top 5 Fabian socialists in Britain, and many other Fabians advocated for this British precursor to Italian fascism. Hobson, who wrote the 1914 book National Guilds, was also a Fabian. The Fabians are a group of rich elitist socialists whose founding belief was that the communist utopia should be arrived at gradually, not by revolution. They have been operating in a deceitful and clandestine manner for nearly 150 years. Deception is the very essence of their method, slowly manoeuvring the British people into a communist state so slowly that we won't be able to realise it's happening at all. And a communist state is the ultimate form of socialist tyranny. The masses farmed by rich, educated elite. And pins and needles in my right foot. Anyway, we are sure most people have never heard of the Fabians, but here's how one of the books exposing this group describes it. As evident from Resolution 1 of the 4th of January 1883 meeting, the Fabian Society's name was chosen in reference to the delaying tactics used by Roman general and dictator, or again, maybe I was right first time, Quintus Fabius Maximus, which reflected the Fabian belief in the gradual establishment of socialism as opposed to the more militant methods advocated by socialist revolutionaries. By socialism, they mean communism, with a state of ownership of industry and with an oligarchy in charge of the state. And that is all he said. Man, a lot to take away from this. And another 7 strokes. So how many strokes is that I've had today so far? I think it's 9. 9 strokes. And if I end up playing with my friends, I'm probably sure I'm going to add another 5 to that shit. So, we'll see how that goes. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening in to me reading the manifesto book. And we will obviously do this again, as always, next Saturday. See how that goes. And, well, that being said, I may not be able to do it, because obviously I've got to make sure I've recovered from having my teeth forcibly extracted. No, sorry, removed, because, as I said before, the 2 wisdom teeth are pushing inwards into my teeth, and I have got 1 tooth approximately here that is basically rotting. So, we'll see how I feel from the surgery. Hopefully, touch wood, I should be recovered from that shit, but if I'm not, I will put a post up and say, guys, I need more time, or I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll do it whenever, but I'll let you guys know. And in the meantime, I wish you all a good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you one last time for watching, and see you all in the next one. Bye-bye for now.